Hello everyone, Shinto Bean here, and in this video I'm going to be talking about one of the single biggest changes coming to the game. It has to do with traits. They are revamping the whole trait system. They've added a 4th tier to the trait and made a bunch of little minor changes, so I'll be going through and talking about all of that in detail, comparing what has been up until now with what it will look like once the new season hits in April of 2021. So first of all, let's talk about the upgrade paths. Each card has an upgrade path determined by the rarity of the card. So legendaries have the shortest upgrade path. They start off at level 1 with their trait already unlocked, and the max level is at 7. But with the new system, their upgrade path is actually the exact same for legendaries. The only difference is that at level 1, they will have the tier 2 version of the trait already unlocked. So any legendaries you have at level 1 right now will be getting an upgrade to their trait once the new season hits. For epic cards, up until now they got their trait unlocked at level 3, and once the new season hits, they will actually have their trait unlocked at level 1, and then future upgrades occur at levels 4, 7, and 10. For rare cards, they had to wait until level 4 to get the trait, but with the new update, they will actually be getting their trait at level 2, and you'll notice that the future upgrade is pushed back to 5. But one thing to note also is that in the case of rare cards, there will be 4 trait upgrades in the path, and that's going to replace one of the stat upgrades, but if I understand it correctly, those stats will actually be added to the stats of the level 1 version of the card. So any rare cards you have at level 1 will be getting a slight boost to their stats. And the same is true for common cards as well, which in the past they had to wait till level 5 to first get their trait, but just like rare cards, they will now be unlocking their trait at level 2, which makes it a lot more accessible for newer players. You only need 2 copies of the card, I believe, to upgrade it to level 2, so very early on you'll be able to see these traits in action. Okay, so now let's go ahead and talk about the changes to the individual traits. There are quite a few of them, and we'll start off with Furious Charge, Precision Shot, and Warp Surge. These are all essentially the same thing. When the card deploys, it just attacks for a percentage of its attack value. And up until now, at tier 1, it dealt 25% of its attack value upon deployment, but these are actually getting increased by a pretty significant amount. At the tier 1, it'll be 40% of its damage. That's a pretty big boost, and they can eventually do up to 100% of their damage on deployment. I think this was kind of needed because these were some of the weaker traits, especially with the addition of some really strong traits recently. These felt a little bit underpowered, so now these guys will actually be hitting pretty hard when they deploy, and they're really good at taking out low health targets, and that'll be made easier with the additional damage that they'll be dealing. Moving on to some of these AoE traits, we got Barrage and Psionic Blast. These dealt a percentage of their base attack as splash damage. For Barrage, it splashes over to the adjacent lanes, and then Psionic Blast activates at the beginning of each turn, dealing damage to all lanes. Up until now, at tier 1, it was dealing 10% of its attack, and that is being increased just slightly at the bottom levels, but remaining the same for the higher levels. So it's largely going to just be the same, I think. Moving on to the melee AoE attack, Death Blow. This is a pretty powerful trait, especially good with the avatar, of course. And lots of numbers here. The top row indicates the percentage of damage it deals to the opposite lane. That's the main target. And then the bottom row is the splash damage that it does to adjacent lanes. Now Death Blow is actually getting a slight reduction, I think, to its damage. Especially the splash damage is being reduced by a bit. So yeah, it's not really going to change very much, I don't think. And yeah, moving on. Medicaid, Outflank, and Inspiring Presence, all very different traits, but they all run with the same percentages. Medicaid heals for that percent on deployment, all of your deployed units. Outflank steals the attack boost from the enemy attack bar, and then Inspiring Presence just boosts the attack power of all of your units by that percentage. So these likewise are getting a slight boost at the lower levels, but remaining the same for the higher levels. Moving on to Scout and Fear. I've included these two together. They're sort of opposites, I guess. One of the things that's slightly confusing about Scout, I think, is that it doesn't actually clearly state how much of a boost it is you're getting from it. So with Scout, when it deploys, you ready once, and one ready equals about 20% boost to the respective attack stat. So with Scout, you'll be readying either once, twice, or 3 times, depending on the tier of the trait. But that's getting increased actually. So in the past, 1 ready equals 20%, and with the new system, the tier 1 Scout will be increasing your overall attack by 30%. And Fear likewise is going to be reducing the enemy damage in the opposite lane by 30%, so a little bit stronger at the bottom level. And I gotta say, Fear is one that it felt a little weak at the tier 1 level of the trait, but it gets a lot stronger as it levels up. So I think this change is a good one. For Psychic Link, likewise, it increases the psychic damage of the unit for each other friendly Psyker on the field. So at tier 1, it increased the attack by 15% for each other Psyker, so you could get a maximum of plus 30% if you had 2 other Psykers on the field. That is getting boosted significantly here. And Psychic Link is a trait that it's quite weak on units that just have very low psychic damage, but then it can get ridiculously strong at the higher levels, especially on really strong Psykers like Ahriman and Eldrad. So in this case, it's getting toned down a little bit at the top tiers, but boosted significantly at the bottom tiers, so it'll really help out the lower level players. Next up, we got Regeneration and Poison. These are kind of opposites, and they either heal or damage at the end of each turn by these amounts. That's how much it has done. 5 damage or health at the end of each turn. And that is getting changed slightly. At tier 1, they'll be either healing or getting dealt damage by 4, which seems like a nerf, but it's actually not, because remember that all these cards will be getting their traits earlier on, so it's going to make a pretty big impact in the earlier game, I think. With the old One Eye there, which is a legendary card that can regenerate, it's going to start off with a tier 2 regeneration, so right off the bat it'll be able to regenerate 8 health at the end of each turn. Moving on to Berserk. Berserker is a very strong trait. Every time the unit takes damage, it gains that much attack, and there's a typo there. It's not percentage based, of course. It's only plus 4 attack at tier 1 every time it takes damage. If that was percent, it would be pretty ridiculous, so just a typo on my part there. This is also getting slightly reduced at the lower levels, but it's still going to be very strong and work in very much the same way, I think. Moving on to Taunt. Now, Taunt is actually going to get a pretty big change. Up until now, depending on the tier of the trait, it would taunt for that many turns. And it would also reduce the incoming damage. I forgot to include that on here. But this is being changed to taunt for 2 turns. No matter what tier the trait is at, it will always be taunting for 2 turns. And then it will reduce the incoming damage depending on what level the trait is at. So this is a good change, I think, because one of the major weaknesses with Taunt was that at level 1 it could only taunt for 1 turn, which made it more situational, with it being able to taunt for 2 turns guaranteed, then it doesn't matter if you deploy it on your turn or your opponent's turn, it will still be able to perform its job. Target acquired is also going to be going through a similar change. Before, it just chose the target and forced all your units to attack that target for 1, 2, or 3 turns. This is again being changed to a fixed 2 turns, but also increasing the damage to the target by these amounts, which is something that a number of players were asking for because they felt that target acquired was just very situational, not a very good trait a lot of the time. So this is going to combo extremely well with Boss Snickrot for sure, to the point where it's going to get pretty ridiculous, but I think Snickrot is one of the less popular bodyguards at the moment, so it'll be fun to see how this works out with him. Next up we got Big Game Hunter. This thing allows your units to deal increased damage as long as the target is a 40 or more points in cost. It's a pretty situational trait. I don't really like using it all that much. It is getting a slight boost at the lower levels, like many of these other traits. Next up we've got Endless. So when Endless cards die for the first time, they redeploy with a percentage of their health. And this one is getting a buff, a pretty decent buff. But again, it's going to work in pretty much the same way. The big difference is it'll be really good for newer players who want to try out warlords like Commissar Yarrick or Gloggerthrox the Foul. Those guys combo well with these Endless units, and up until now, newer players were not able to use them very effectively because it just took so long to get these traits unlocked, but from here on out, they'll be able to use them much more efficiently early on. And then last but not least, we've got Shield. And Shield is not really going through any major changes. They just tacked on a 4th shield for the final tier of the trait. However, I think because the traits are getting shifted to earlier on, the upgrades to the traits, I think we'll probably be seeing units with 2 to 3 shields a lot more often, which is a little intimidating, but again, there are a lot of other traits that counter shields, like Barrage or Psionic Blast, those AoE traits. So there are still ways to counter shields, but they may become a little more relevant thanks to this change. So a lot of information there. Just to summarize, we've got a 4th trait added to the game as the final upgrade in the path. Traits will in general be unlocked a lot earlier. In fact, the only cards that will not have their trait unlocked are level 1 commons and rares. Every other card will have its trait, so it'll be a much more integral part of the game at all stages of the game. And overall, I think they will feel a little bit stronger. They're all working in the same way, but again, they'll just be a lot more visible all the time and be a bigger part of the strategy. So, let me know what you think of these changes. If there are any traits that you think will see more play thanks to this change, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.